Hello and welcome to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a production of Creation Justice Ministries. Green Lectionary is a conversation for preachers looking at Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derek Weston, and today we'll be looking at Matthew 13 as we work through the Sundays of Ordinary Time. My guest today is Daniel Wolpert. Reverend Wolpert is a healer, student of spiritual life who has worked as a research scientist, psychologist, spiritual director, farmer, teacher, and construction worker, as well as a pastor. He's the author of several books, including Creation's Wisdom, Spiritual Practice, and Climate Change. I'm proud to announce that this year the Green Lectionary Podcast will be a part of the God Pods at Theology Beer Camp. Theology Beer Camp is a unique 3-day experience for theology nerds and church outcasts. I had the pleasure of attending last year and got to hear a slate of amazing speakers and have excellent conversations about the current state and the future of the church, all while enjoying some excellent craft beers. Theology Beer Camp will be taking place at Pine Ridge Presbyterian Church in Kansas City, Missouri from October 8th to 10th. Hope to see you there. You can learn more at theologybeer.camp. Join us now as we look at Matthew 13 through the lens of creation justice. I am here with Daniel Wolpert. Daniel, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Daniel, you have been kind of discovering that you've been around sort of the creation justice, thinking about where faith in creation and all of those sorts of things intersect for a while. I'm kind of interested in what brought you to this space and where did you start to see these intersections first?
Well, really, this has been a lifelong thing for me. I mean, my earliest, what I would now describe as mystical experiences, all started in relation to nature. Been a nature junkie forever. I mean, as long as I can remember. And so, I think it was always very obvious to me that relating to nature, engaging our human activity in a way that was ecologically healthy, all those kinds of things was extremely important. So, have been involved in various environmental activism things for a long, long time. And I would say in some ways it's been very second nature to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And how has, as your vocation has moved along and evolved, how would you say that second nature has informed the way that you think about your work?
Well, I would say that I'm always thinking about our relationship as humans to the rest of reality, right? So I don't, it's so often to almost talk about human beings as somehow being separate from nature, which always seems very weird to me. Even to the extent that, right, we now, bury bodies in these hermetically sealed coffins so that they almost to like prove that we're not part of the natural world. Like if we don't decompose, then maybe we're separate from nature. So, and I think that as the climate crisis has accelerated, and of course, this is something that, many of us have been talking about for literally decades, but as it's accelerated, it's become clear to me that our very disordered relationship with nature is coming more and more to the forefront of what we're dealing with and what we're up against. So, I would say that a greater sense of urgency or wanting to speak about this, being involved with different groups and people and activities like yourself that are working with this, all of that has just, I would say, taken on a greater sense of importance and value.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that sense of urgency, do you like, I often feel like, I don't know, maybe it'll never feel urgent enough, but I feel like it's particularly in the last year, I would say probably since the start of the current administration, it's felt like it's been such an easy thing to kick to the back burner for other things that feel more pressing. And
Mhm.
so it's interesting to hear you say that you do you sense that urgency or do you feel like it's heightened or is that just in
Well,
comparison? I don't know.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right in regards to the United States, right?
Mm,
Since
mm,
since the current administration has come in, I feel that in the United States, climate issues have almost vanished from the
mm,
conversation. Now, from a worldwide perspective, yes, there is a tremendous amount of urgency. I mean, when I travel internationally, this is all that people are talking about in regards to
mm.
almost any issue that comes up. And, you know, it's hard for us, I think, to understand, and for people that don't travel internationally, how absolutely disordered we are in the United States, where you still have these large numbers of people that are pretending that this crisis doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Which is not the case elsewhere, right? That's not to say that you can't find maybe some climate deniers in some other places, but again, the dominant conversation around the world is that absolutely this is a problem, absolutely this is real. There is a tremendous sense of urgency about it. So we're really the outliers. But you're right. Within this country in the last year, it has been so noticeable how this has kind of disappeared as any kind of serious conversation, which is, tragic, but given the nature of our current administration is not surprising.
Right. Right. And I think, you're absolutely right. One of the things that I have found more and more, and maybe this is a helpful corrective, is just, if we're really looking for leadership on this crisis, it's global. It's international. There are people who are doing brilliant things in other parts of the world, and that's kind of humbling, and I think kind of a necessary humbling for those of us in the United States to kind of realize that we've lost leadership. We've lost the opportunity to have leadership on this issue, and that's really something that we should grieve.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And and paradoxically, like this war in Iran has actually just accelerated leadership on this issue outside of the United
Yeah,
States.
yeah, yeah.
Because one of the things that this war has done on the kind of negative side of all of this is to show how we have not really progressed very far away from fossil fuels,
Mhm.
right? But then the flip side of that is that I think it has woken up more and more people and entire countries to the fact that, oh, maybe we stuff that, oh, by the way, is, you know, largely coming to us through this tiny little strait of water that could get closed at any minute.
Yep.
And, maybe that'll be a problem. But absolutely. I mean, the leadership around this issue is very much coming from places outside of the United States at this point. There's no
Yeah.
question about that in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's transition here and talk about our passage for today. We're going to be looking at a pretty well-known parable coming from Matthew chapter 13 verses 1 to 9 and 18 to 23, known as the parable of the sower. So starting in verse 1, that same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the crowd stood on the beach. He told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on a path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. If you have ears, hear." And skipping to verse 18, "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of this age and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. So, Daniel, where is creation in this passage?
Well, I think that's pretty obvious. This is a hard one in this regard. And in our email exchange, you mentioned that, for those of you that are looking at the rest of the lectionary for this week, creation is kind of all over the place, right? I mean, here you have this farming piece. In one of the other passages, you have the discussion of the recycling of water and the ecosystems. Creation is everywhere, and in fact, in general, creation is pretty much everywhere in the Bible. I mean,
Yeah.
this is sort of one of the funny things, in a sense, that the fact that we even have to ask this question, right, shows or the ways in which we diverge from really listening to the text. But obviously, this is a farming parable, and so we're looking at how seeds grow, but we're also looking at, for those of us who have done farming, kind of a strange story about a sower, right? This is not a regular sower. But yeah, the basic dynamics of seeds and growing and harvesting and the ecology of that are center stage here.
Say a little bit more about what you mean when you say this is not a typical sower, because I think it's really easy for those of us who haven't farmed and to take some things just for granted and like take a lot of these parables at face value. So what do you mean when you say this is not a typical sower?
Yeah. Well, so when you're a farmer, and particularly when you're a subsistence farmer, and so that's the other thing, is that the people listening to this initially are what we call subsistence farmers, which means that they are not only having to feed themselves and their family, but they are also having to farm to gather their own seeds for next year, right? So you don't have the seed company, your Monsanto rep doesn't come out and sell you the seeds for the next year, in many years you don't have any surplus to sell to the market, but maybe you have some, a little bit to sell. And so seeds are at an incredible premium, right? So if you're an average farmer, you don't take seeds and just throw them all over the place, right?
Mhm.
So this sower, I mean, people would be listening to this story and thinking, this sower is crazy. Uh, they're throwing their seeds on rocks, they're throwing their seeds in the weeds, they're throwing their seeds on the path. This person is obviously behaving in a very different way than your average human farmer, who very carefully makes furrows in the ground and puts every seed in a good place, in good soil.
Mhm.
So there's clearly something unusual going on here. And
Mhm.
part of the problem with this lectionary passage is that there are some parables that the texts turn into fables, right? By having this
Mhm.
explanation afterwards. You've taken a parable which is supposed to kind of open up our consciousness and reduce it to a fable which just explains something. And so you have the
Mhm.
answer, in the text, and we can get into this later, but the imperial church uses this then in a very disordered sort of way.
Mhm.
But the initial hearing, everybody listening to this, sitting on the shore, would have recognized that something very different is going on here.
Mhm.
And again, those of us that are not farmers or haven't been farmers, or people that don't even think about it, you're like, oh yeah, well, this makes sense. Sure, that this is an example, right? Like, no, this is a weird farmer.
And I so appreciate you naming that, because I've actually read several commentaries on this parable that have said, "Oh yeah, that's just the way people farmed back then." And I was like, that's ridiculous. Like that that's absolutely insane. Like
Yeah.
there's no way, particularly as you've noted, when you are dependent on every seed yielding something for your very existence, you're not going to be haphazard about
No.
where you throw your seed. And so I think this
Yeah,
is
that's hilarious, right? I mean, because basically a subsistence farmer that does this essentially dooms himself to starvation. So
yeah,
there's nobody that's going to do this. I mean, like literally no one is going to do this.
yeah, yeah. So then I think then there is you then kind of tee up the question here of like, what is this farmer, quote unquote, what is this farmer doing? And like, how do we understand what this parable's farmer is doing?
Yeah, so when you ask that question, think about it, you say, okay, well, what is the parallel here? So
Mm,
again, assuming that the farmer is the God figure in the story, right, somehow. So the parallel here really is normal ecology.
mm, mm,
And so if you
mm,
think about the forest, or you think about, a field, or you think about even, you know, uh, and not so much mammals, but certainly things like amphibians or reptiles or fish. Okay, what happens in a normal ecology? In a normal ecology, there is a way overproduction of seed,
mhm,
right? And so most of the seed that gets scattered in the forest, let's say, so for example, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so you have all these evergreens, and these evergreens produce these pine cones and they explode, and you've got thousands of seeds all over the place. First of all, hardly any of them sprout at all in the normal forest. Of the ones that do sprout, many of them never grow into very significant trees. And if you go into the forest and you see, a giant old growth tree, let's say, you think about the fact that when it was a seedling or when it was a seed, you're literally talking about one in 1,000, maybe one in 2,000, or maybe even one in 10,000 that actually make it to becoming that giant tree that lives for several
mm,
hundred years, right? So I think we need to start with the fact, and again, when you have creation in this, I would say that the obvious surface level is farming and seeds and growing, but I would say that really what we're seeing is we're actually seeing of a healthy ecosystem.
mm,
Right? That this is the way a healthy ecosystem looks, that all the plants are producing this superabundance of seed. Very few of those seeds actually yield anything.
mm,
And again, the explanation is to moralize about this. But in the normal ecosystem, there is no moralizing about it. The
mm,
seeds are there. And what's interesting, of course, is that as conditions change, I mean, those seeds sit there and seeds last for a long, long time. Some seeds are viable for literally thousands of years, right? And as
mhm,
conditions change, suddenly maybe those seeds will sprout, right?
mhm,
So, for
mhm,
example, if there's a fire, it's well known that after fires, many of the seeds that have been sitting dormant will sprout to help regenerate the ecosystem. So yeah, this I would say that in many ways, God as the creator of the whole earth and universe and of ecosystems is now sowing within an ecosystem, a healthy
mm.
ecosystem. And this is what we're seeing here.
Okay, you just kind of blew my mind a little bit. Because I mean that's absolutely brilliant. Like that is exactly what happens in creation. It's not this, this manufactured factory, like straight lines of the way that we work the land. Creation, immediately as you were speaking, I was thinking of the milkweed that is in my yard, and when the seeds explode, and like you can't contain those things. I mean, they're all over the place. But that's how, like, it's as a part of an ecosystem. Of course there's going to be some seed that hits good soil, but there's also going to be seed that is food for birds and food for animals, and viable seed for the future. That is like, yes, this is a contradiction of what a normal quote unquote farmer would do, but this is what creation does, which is a pretty radical reframing of this parable in my mind. Like, this is something that is actually bringing us back to focusing on how creation operates and not how humans operate.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so then we have to start moving into, particularly when we're talking about, okay, how do modern humans operate relative to farming and seeds, and how do we take what is the normal ecosystem functioning, and what do we do with it? Well, what we do with it, and this is what industrial farming is all about, right, is we insist that every single seed produces a hundredfold,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so, again, if you think about the regular ecosystem, well, one of the reasons that you have this kind of 1,000 to 1 ratio is that if every single seed produced a giant tree, the fact is that the ecosystem wouldn't function,
Right.
right?
Right.
It would collapse. There would be too much resource depletion. There would be overcrowding, and we see this within, for example, ecosystems where the predators have been removed. I mean, I was just having a conversation with my sister-in-law about this, about the island that she lives on, and these feral goats have gotten loose,
Mm.
and they are literally going to eat every plant on the island, right? And all these people who are quote animal lovers are like, oh no, we can't kill the goats. It's like, well, if you don't kill the goats, at some point the goats are all going to starve to death because there won't be any plant life left
Right.
on the island, because they will have literally eaten all of it. In many places, rural places that I've lived, this has always been a discussion with deer population, right? That the deer get overpopulated, they start starving, all kinds of terrible things happen, right? So in a healthy ecosystem, not every seed can produce a hundredfold. But that's exactly what industrial farming tries to do.
Mm.
It's also what industrial production tries to do. It's also, and the expectation of we will all be maximally efficient, maximally productive. What that then leads to is essential prices. Right.
Mm.
So that you cannot have that in any kind of a balanced ecosystem. That is a disordered relationship with creation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even thinking about the way that the parable is set up, that when we get to the conclusion of it, with the seeds that do land on good soil, some give a hundredfold, some give 60, and some give 30. And there's not really a judgment about the ones that give 30. There's not really a, like, oh, these were lesser seeds, or like this was a lesser outcome. It's just that
Mhm.
sometimes you only get 30.
Right. Well, and in the parable itself, there actually isn't a judgment about any of the seeds.
Yeah, that's true.
right?
That's
I mean,
great.
that's in the explanation.
Yeah.
The judgment comes in the explanation, which, we have to really question whether or not Jesus gave that explanation or not.
Mm-hmm.
But but yeah, I mean, the sower went out to sow. And look, this is, one of the things this reminds me of is the other comment in scripture, God causes the rain to fall upon the just and the unjust.
Mm.
Right? Everybody gets rained on. Everybody gets water out of the sky, right? Everybody gets seeds chucked at them. Just, you give the example of milkweed when you were talking about that. I was thinking about living in Colorado and these giant cottonwood trees, right? And
Mm.
when they explode with their seeds, like you literally get them all over your clothing when you go outside. I mean, it's like the air sometimes is white with these things, and yeah, everybody gets seeds on them.
Yeah. So what do we make then of, kind of moving to our next question? What do we make then of the way that humans are interacting with the more than human world here? Both sort of in the framework of the parable, but also sort of as we step back, kind of looking at a big picture of like, is it kind of making a commentary on the ways that humans interact with the more than human world? So,
Mhm.
because I feel like you've kind of led us down that road a little bit.
Right. Well, yeah. So then the next step is, okay, so if this is a parable that has something to do with God and our spiritual life, where is that happening? How is that happening? So we have to put that then in the context of Jesus and his ministry and Galilee and the Roman Empire and all the stuff that he
Mhm.
is dealing with this with. So what does the empire do with this? Well, the empire sadly does exactly what the explanation does, right? The empire says, okay, so this is about accumulating, right? Getting that good yield. Right, we haven't even talked about what is the yield. See, that's the other
Mm.
thing, is that we impose all kinds of assumptions when we're talking spiritually what the yield looks like. So, I think about, this lovely spectacle at the White House the other day, right? Where where at the end of it, somebody actually said, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and Michelle Obama is a man, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so from the perspective of empire, they take this parable and they would say, yeah, we're doing it. Like we're
Mm.
getting the yield. We've taken over the White House, we've taken over Washington, we've destroyed the Kennedy Center, we're owning the libs, all the things, right? So imperial Christianity looks at this and simply sees this whole thing as a validation of empire.
Mm.
Right? Those who are winning get more stuff, right? Elon Musk becomes a trillionaire this week. Like he's bearing good fruit. Like he's not got a hundredfold, he's got 100 millionfold. Right? And so, if we filter this parable through the imperial lens, what we simply get is essentially the prosperity gospel, right?
Yeah.
Like more and more stuff, and of course, that just accelerates the climate crisis. And so
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
more accumulation. So, but Jesus was clearly not saying that ever in
Right.
his entire ministry. He was not doing that. When his disciples would say, "Well, aren't you going to be the empire?" He would call them Satan. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
so, so so we can't see that through this lens. And I want to bring in another text into this
Mm.
because of course there's a very famous way that that this parable has been used, and that's in Octavia Butler's book, right? The
Mhm.
Parable of the Sower.
Yeah.
And Octavia Butler, for those listeners who don't know her, I would highly recommend that you start reading her right away. uh, was an amazing Black woman, science fiction writer, fantasy writer, and was kind of an earlier or very early proponent of what's now being talked about as Afrofuturism, and very connected to womanist theology. And so in her book, right, which is this horrific, I mean, it's very intense, right? Very, very, very intense, very difficult portrayal of kind of post-apocalyptic America, becoming truer and truer every day, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It- and she uses this parable of the sower, and the person who is producing the yield, right, is one of the least powerful people in society. So it's this young Black girl who's the daughter of a Baptist minister, who's holed up in this enclave in Los Angeles, what's left of Los Angeles. And she is this visionary who is creating a new religion,
Mhm.
right? And so, we have to filter this issue of yield through this notion of the upside down kingdom. Right. So the yield, the positive yield on the spiritual side, is going to be completely antithetical to the imperial idea of yield.
Mhm.
And so again, if we also filter this through farming, right? So I was an organic vegetable farmer. I know lots of non-organic vegetable farmers. They get higher yields.
Mm.
Right? They had bigger, melons, bigger cucumbers, whatever. Um, and their soil and ecology was dead.
Mm.
I mean,
Mhm.
I literally remember going to visit some of these commercialized farms, vegetable farms, and you are literally looking at a desert,
Mm.
right? The soil on those farms is completely destroyed. It is destroyed by pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. It is then destroyed by the overuse of artificial fertilizers, which kills all of the bacteria in the soil. I mean, you pick up a handful of that soil and you're picking up dust.
Mm.
Now, it produces these big fat vegetables, but they are completely fake in a way, right? And the farm is now completely dependent on all of those artificial inputs.
Mm.
And in fact, I've converted commercially grown soils to non-commercially grown soils. And what happens in between, and this is something that most people have never seen or experienced, is terrifying,
Hmm.
right? That in the first couple of years after you stop putting all that stuff into the soil, and you talk about seeds that have been dormant. What comes out of these, I mean, I have literally seen fields of 8-foot tall thistles,
Oh, jeez.
right? That this incredible superabundance of what we call weeds, and just
Yeah.
all of these species that have been suppressed and only grow on very depleted, unhealthy soils, just jump out of the ground, like
Mm.
some sort of, monsters. Um, so, so again, when we think about what industrial farming does to the soils and to the ecology, right? So again, the parable is giving us the natural ecology. What that farming does is it kills the natural ecology,
Mm.
right? It actually kills the word. Um, and 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 on the other hand, when you are engaged with the ecology in a healthy way, when you're listening deeply, when you're spiritually connected, you begin to exist in that ecology in a healthy manner.
Mm.
And your yield may be industrially less, but you are in the process of co-creating life with God,
Mm.
who is creating a living ecology. You're not creating a dead ecology for short-term gain.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, there's so much that's good there. I read almost embarrassingly, I read Parable of the Sower for the first time during the 2016 election. And yeah, can't recommend it enough because it's starting to more and more feel like a documentary. But I think this idea that what is going to yield from sowing this way is life. Like that if we're actually what's actually the actual yield that is coming from sowing this way is justice, it's peace, it's love, it's community, it's liberation. That becomes our yield. And so it's obviously you're not going to get that harvest from empire. And you're not going to get that harvest from imperial practices. You're not going to get that harvest from imperial inputs. You're only going to get that from the embracing of a natural ecology way of being.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that's kind of a beautiful framing of this parable that I think is just for honestly one I've never really heard before, and I think really brings this text to life for me in a way that I don't think I've considered. So I want to before we move on, I do want to ask this question: what's this parable about if we don't have the explanation? If we don't have that explanation that starts in verse 18, the like how did you say that at the beginning, that it becomes a fable? Like if we're not fableizing it,
Yeah.
what is this parable saying if we're not fableizing it?
Well, I mean, I think that's what we've been talking about, right? I mean, the problem with the explanation is that, again, you can just take it then and say, okay, well, we're producing lots of stuff, so therefore we must be doing it.
Mm,
Right? It's just very easy then to take it and lay it onto the rubric of empire,
yeah,
because the
yeah.
rubric of empire is about accumulation and production, right? So again, you can look at the industrial farmland that has been, not only have the soils been depleted, right, but our social fabric has been depleted. Societies have been destroyed. The farmlands have been emptied. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we have, a permanent set of red states in the middle of the country.
Mm,
Our farm policy has emptied out that part of, destroyed all those societies, destroyed those towns, destroyed those cities, and the few people that are left are, farming these massive tracts of, empty desert, and they're mad, and they feel terrible. And this is another thing that people in cities have very, very little understanding of.
mm,
It's created a massive socio-political crisis for us in the United States. So, that's always the problem with a fableized explanation, is you don't have to stop and go, okay, wait a minute, like, what is weird in this story?
mm,
Like, what is not making sense to my normal way of thinking? Once you have an explanation, you can just lay it on top of your regular way of thinking,
mm,
right? And the purpose of parables is to explode our regular way of thinking. And that's what spiritual
mm,
teachers do. They try to, explode our regular way of thinking to then get us to stop for a second and go, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's something different going on here. Yeah,
mm.
which is, I think, what we've been talking
Yeah,
about here.
yeah. Again, because if you leave it after verse 9, again, you're not really making any judgment about any of the seeds, because some seeds fall on rocky ground, and some seeds are eaten by birds, and some seeds are scorched, and like there's no real judgment made on them until you get to that explanation where it becomes about the yield. and it becomes it kind of puts those imperial values onto it. It becomes a very different parable.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the question of then how do church communities relate to this, right? I mean, as soon as you start judging the different seeds, now you're getting, ableism and racism and patriarchy and all the things like, well, I must be the good follower of the word because I've got 1 million followers on Instagram, and you get out of bed and send an email, so you must be the seed that fell on rocky ground and you suck. And there become all these internalized issues of worthlessness,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
of course, that's what the industrial imperial model does to people. If you can't if you can't punch the clock and work your shift, and you're not a good factory cog, you get thrown away, right?
Yeah.
You literally get tossed out. And so, I think that that's the other problem with these explanations, is that when they get superimposed upon the model of what is in the world, a tremendous amount of harm can get done as well, right? On the other hand, if it's like, no, every seed has actually a role in the ecology. Every seed is functioning as it should be, and different things happen, right? Again, the seed that falls on bad ground, well, what happens when 20 years later that gets plowed, or there's a fire, or after a lot of, organic matter has decomposed there, and suddenly it becomes good soil, and then those seeds grow, and, these are seeds for the future. And I think that that's another thing when, going back to Octavia Butler and Afrofuturism, you know, that is all about saying, well, wait a minute, we are going to look at how is it that the word, how that our spiritual life and practice is moving us towards a just and enlightened future. And what are the ways of understanding the habits, the practices of community that are actually creating the future that we cannot imagine, or we cannot see right now, but imagine. And that's, to me, the way that all spiritual teachings, and definitely parables, really are meant to be engaged.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And you've kind of already started us down the road of where's their call to action for the church. I think you've given us a way of thinking that I think is helpful, but how do we actualize this in our communities, in our faith communities? Like what is the call to action for the church here?
Mhm. Well, so I think, I mean, there's several things, and several different steps to that, and I do think that the beginning of it really starts by unpacking this incredibly negative theology of judgment, right? I mean, there are
Mhm.
just so many people that are taught in church, in society, but definitely a very heavy theological dose of this, that somehow, or in many ways, I am bad and inadequate, right? I not the good seed. And that does tremendous damage to the human being. And certainly people that work in disability theology talk about this all the time, right? That if you are not able to perform in the way that society tells you is good to perform, you feel and experience yourself and are treated like you are not. You're a worthless human being. So, I think that's the first call to action, is to begin to really say no to that theology, and
Mhm.
to really reverse that, and to recognize that, no, actually, in an ecological system, in a healthy ecology, when you walk into a healthy forest, which, by the way, is harder and harder to find these days, but when you walk into a healthy forest and you look at that, you know, the things that you see are a tiny percentage of what keeps that ecology healthy. right? You don't see the funguses, you don't see the seeds lying in wait, you don't see the decomposed matter, the creatures that are underground. And yet all of those things keep that ecology healthy, right? And what Empire does is goes in and says, oh, this one huge tree, that's the only valuable thing in this ecology, because that's, 20,000 board feet, and I'm going to cut it down and make money, right? No, everything is a part of the healthy ecology. So I think that's, to me, one of the first calls to action that comes out of this. But then I think the other piece is, okay, if we have this very different understanding of what yield is, and I think you just gave this great list. Like, what is the yield of the word? Well, the yield is justice and peace and love and equality and, thriving and care. So what are the practices that we're doing that are not just about, many churches are just so focused, how many members do we have? How many butts do we have in the pews? How much money do we have in the bank? Right? That's the definition of yield that our society gives us. I just heard about a church the other day, a 20-member church that once a week hosts this meal. They're serving 600 people in their community every single week, right? Who aren't members, they're not, paying dues, they're not, well, but this church is producing this incredible fruit, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's the other thing, is that we have to start looking and imagining different kinds of fruit, and then asking ourselves, as we look in our ecosystem, right? So we start attending to our ecosystem. What is our community? What is our town? What is our neighborhood? How is it that we can begin to, practice organic farming? But, something that is going to bring life into the community, whatever that may be, and however we feel called, and what our gifts and skills are.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I mean, I think that's, what you're inviting us to is really rethinking what is it we're actually measuring? What is it we actually value? What is actually going to lead to our communities being what they're supposed to be for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not making these judgments about where seeds fall. And that when we do have a harvest, it's a harvest that is of the things that are reminiscent of the dream of God, that it's love, that it's abundance for all of God's people. And I think that's, you have helped reframe this parable for me in a really significant and profound way, and I am incredibly grateful for that.
Well, thank you. It's a very kind word.
So thank you for being here with us. Thank you for your insight and your wisdom. And let's do this again sometime.
That would be great.
Thank you for joining us for the Green Lectionary podcast. This episode was produced by Sprocket Wagner, and the song Within These Pages was written and produced by Christian McIver. You can learn more about this and other programs of Creation Justice Ministries at creationjustice.org.
Our story comes alive within these pages, for every time and place throughout the ages. God speaks and is heard, and the enduring word calls us to care for our world as we share the love that can set creation free. Restoring the earth to wholeness, peace, and harmony. Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound within these pages. there's always new life to be found.